Madoff was fully managing the money of JET, of the Levy
Well, not
churches.
of JET, actually, but of the Levy churches. JET actually is not an endowed foundation. It was a foundation that received its money on a yearly basis from the Levy churches. So our money came in as we needed it, in effect. And we'd establish a budget at the beginning of every year, and we'd use that money over the course of the year, but it would come in through the family. And
you're closing now.
We are closing.
When did you get word?
We learned of this Thursday night, the same time the family learned of it, and we heard about it...
the day that Madoff was arrested.
Exactly, and it was on actually the online newscast from the Wall Street Journal that the family heard about, and then they called me immediately, and we sprung into action because we knew that it was a crisis of, for us, monumental impact.
Talk about who JET funds, who's going to lose this funding now, because this is immediate. You've closed, the final closing of the doors is the end of January, but you've stopped all funding right now.
We've stopped all funding at this point. Let me first say the areas we fund, I think, because it kind of puts a context on who we fund. The foundation funds in 4 program areas. We have, I think, the largest program in the country funding criminal justice reform. So even though we're a foundation of not, we're not the size of a Ford Foundation or some of the better-known household names in philanthropy, we are a foundation in the areas we fund in that has a very significant impact in those areas. So in the criminal justice area is one, juvenile justice is another. International justice, particularly the role of the U.S. as a player in the world and trying to uphold the U.S.'s role as a country that supports international norms and standards of rights. And then lastly, election reform work, and we have a significant program in that area. And in each case, we're one of the largest funders, if not the largest funder in the country, funding that particular issue. So the impacts will be enormous for our grantees. And we also tend to make rather large grants. We tend to, when we believe an organization is doing good work, we take very high stake in that organization because we think because there are so few funders in this area, we've always felt that if we believe the work is good, we should really be supporting it and not assume that they can get the money from elsewhere because there isn't a lot of places for them to go. And so that has an even greater impact on these groups than it might otherwise have if we were funding in an area where there are hundreds of funders. Well,
groups like the Innocence Project, I see here, you've given over $5 million committed.
Correct.
Now they're dealing with more than $2 million for the next 3 years. Can they make it outside of you?
They will survive. I mean, the Innocence Project is really one of the wonderful success stories that we've had in working with them. And one of the things we were able to do with the Innocence Project from the onset is, in every group, we try to help them really diversify their funding because it's in their self-interest and more than even in ours at the time. So we worked very closely with the leadership of the Innocence Project over the last 4 to 5 years with making major grants to them, but also pushing them to raise money from other sources.
Human Rights Watch, more than $1 million.
Right. Human Rights Watch is, we're a major funder of Human Rights Watch. But again, Human Rights Watch is an organization that will survive. But the losses, for example, we funded their international justice work. Well, Human Rights Watch is a huge institution and has a multi-million-dollar yearly budget, but their international justice program has a budget that we were fully probably at least half of in terms of our funding. And so it gives you a sense of the impact on that program as opposed to the institution as a whole.
Did ProPublica, the investigative news website, get money from JET?
They did, a modest grant from us when they were starting up because we felt investigative reporting is kind of central to all the work we do in all the areas we work in. We're interested in the kind of work ProPublica does. And of course, investigative reporting in this country is increasingly diminishing.
Stop Prisoner Rape. These are organizations that are probably not going to get a lot of money elsewhere. You gave $300,000. Massive hit for them.
Right. And that is an interesting story because Stop Prisoner Rape was an organization we funded in conjunction with the Department of Corrections in Oregon. And we funded both the department and Stop Prisoner Rape to jointly work together on a program. And that program, I hope will survive because the state of Oregon is very committed and the head of corrections there is very committed to do that work.
Kansas Department of Corrections, over $4.5 million.
Huge amount of money. And with great results, I might add. And so this is a situation where JET's been unique in the field in many ways because we've been willing to fund a broad range of players, from advocates in the field to academics to, in fact, government itself, Kansas being a good example, Oregon being another good example. When they were doing creative, innovative work in the field, we were providing state government with the money they didn't have to do the innovation. We don't fund them for direct service work because we don't feel that's a good role for a foundation. But often state government doesn't have the kind of money to do the innovations they need to do to make their programs work effectively. State of Michigan, similarly, we have a huge program there, a reentry program, and it's also beginning now to show results. So these are tragedies not only for our grantees, but for the people they serve.
Finally, Paul Keel, what next? What happens next? This now being talked about is bigger than Enron. Right.
Well, I mean, as far as I can tell, the SEC has been spending, every waking hour since Thursday night trying to unwind, exactly how this happened. So, that $50 billion number comes from Madoff himself, is what apparently he told, the feds when they knocked on his door on Thursday. I think, one big thing that's to come is people are going to be taking a real hard look at the SEC, which I think Christopher Cox knows. So that's why he's called for this investigation. But for instance, Madoff was an investment advisor, and along with hedge funds, they are fairly loosely regulated. He only registered with the SEC in about September of 2006. The way it's supposed to work, the SEC is supposed to occasionally, open up the books to an inspection, just sort of, a good seal of good housekeeping type of thing. But they never looked at the firm because they're very understaffed, so they can only look about 10% of these investment advisors. So I think, there was already a lot of talk of maybe, the SEC doesn't survive, when we finally do this regulatory overhaul that most people think is inevitable after the financial crisis. At the very least, you have to look at, the staffing issue, all these loopholes that investment advisors and hedge funds have in terms of how loosely regulated they are. Those sorts of things are definitely going to be.
Well, Paul Keel, I want to thank you for being with us, reporter with ProPublica, news investigative website, and Robert Crane, the president of the JET Foundation, which is now closing its doors. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll be joined by Professor, UN envoy Richard Falk. He's just been detained and deported from Israel as he tried to get into Gaza. We'll talk to him. Stay with us.